Okay, so it's good to see everyone. As I said a moment ago, it's good to see um, that people have taken the time out of their Passover preparations to sit down and watch live. And so this is the third of 3 weeks that we're spending on Passover in our journey through the Jewish year, and which is about the right amount of time for those who prepare for Passover in the traditional manner, with the cleaning and the purchasing of kosher for Passover food and everything like that. It takes a few weeks to get ready for the holiday, and then it's kind of anticlimactic once the holiday comes, because it's just a week. All this preparation that takes a month to do, and all the cooking, and maybe, God willing, you'll have some family with you this year for the seder, so it's not all on Zoom, so that it's at least, it at least feels like it's worth all the work because you have people coming over. But then just a week later, the holiday's over, you're packing it all up again. So Passover was my favorite holiday growing up because my parents did all the work. And I got the benefit of eating the special food, and so just these memories of the seder and Passover itself, the special dishes that we had that were just special for Passover, the Haggadot that we used, just bring back really, really lovely memories. But then once we started hosting Passover, it's not exactly my favorite holiday anymore, just with all the work involved. Having family and friends, when we're able to do that again too, that's always a lot of fun. It's the work that is not so much fun. So what I wanted to talk about today is the seder itself, and go through all the parts and talk about it. Let's begin by talking about Haggadah. For the past 20 or so years, this edition was published in 1997 from the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. You can purchase this online from, get a load of this website, Haggadahs Are Us. So just like Toys R Us. So it's not A-R-E for the R, it's the letter R. HaggadahsAreUs.com, and you can purchase this one. I like this edition of the Haggadah, and I think people who come to our Seder like it as well, because every page is set up like this. So you have the component of the Haggadah right here, English translation and transliteration right here, and then commentary and other suggested readings on this page. So it's really a double page for every page of the Haggadah. It's really great. And then also for certain parts of the Seder, like when we'll get to it, the four sons, just one second, it has several pages of Haggadot over the years of different illustrations of how the four sons have been depicted in Haggadot throughout the years. So that's kind of fun too. So I like the Haggadah for that. It's the traditional text with a very modern and accurate English translation. It has transliteration in it too, so that no matter who's at the table, they can participate. And if people get bored around the table, there's stuff to read as the Seder is going on around them, depending on how traditional your Seder is. So that's what. So that's the Haggadah I use. Again, it's called A Different Night, edited by Noam Zion, Z-I-O-N. Noam Tzion, who's been a longtime faculty member of the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. So just look for that online or at haggadahsareus.com. There are so many different Haggadot out there. There are thematic Haggadot, like vegetarian Haggadot, immigrant Haggadot. Whatever the social justice issue is, there's a Haggadah that reflects that particular theme. It might not be the traditional text of the Haggadah, but it reflects that particular idea. All these, there are so many Haggadot out there because population surveys of the North American Jewish community over the years continue to highlight that Passover and the Passover seder especially is the #1 ritual that's observed by Jews in America today. Now, they may not, it doesn't mean that they're observing it in the traditional way. And there are some who do the seder on the weekend. I mean, this year the seder is on a weekend, Saturday night and Sunday night. But there are years, of course, where the seder would happen during the week. And there are many, many people who would postpone the seder till the weekend just because that's more convenient. So, and many people who will do the seder not in a kosher for Passover way and not in a traditional way. But when asked by the survey, do you have a seder? The answer is yes. It's it's over 80% of the Jewish community. And the latest survey says that there are 7.6 million Jews in America today. 1.6 million are children. 25% of the 7 million adults are under the age of 30, I think it said. So that's a good sign, I think, for the Jewish community in America today. So over 80% have some kind of Passover seder, which is why when publishing companies publish a Haggadah, it might make good business sense to do that because there would be an audience for it. There are many Haggadot available online for free as well, just to download. And so, or Haggadah supplements, so special readings that you can add to your Seder if you'd like. There are songs, if you Google Seder songs, there are a whole variety, not just of the traditional melodies for the text of the Seder, but creative parody kind of songs that you can add to your Seder as well as a number of videos that are out there by the Jewish a cappella groups, Maccabees, 613, Y Studs, and a variety of groups like that. That, depending on how you do your Seder and how much electronics you incorporate into your Seder, you could have a whole multimedia presentation around your table that would be interactive and fun and very spirited. So that's yes, Sylvia, unmute. Just press the microphone. Yeah, there you go.
I think I have it now.
Yeah.
I have a Haggadah here that my granddaughter, Danny, put together.
Herself.
And in addition, there are some family pictures.
Oh, that's nice too.
Of the different seders that we've had throughout the years.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So there's a whole variety of things. There's no end to the creativity that we can do to make the Seder. So you know, I just saw one today of these many Haggadot that are out there. Right. So there's Margie and Steve. You can make your own Haggadah at haggadot.com. That's right. So you can do whatever you'd like. If you're into the comedy show Schitt's Creek, there's a Schitt's Creek Haggadah.
Oh, sure.
That I saw an email for that advertised today, which has little clips of the characters saying something that the editor of this one somehow incorporates into the Haggadah itself. It's really crazy. It's just funny to see those clips. Anyway, so that's just about the Haggadot itself. What I want to also point out that this year, as I've said for the past couple of weeks, Passover, when it begins on a Saturday night, adds a challenge to us that we might not normally have if Passover begins on a weekday. The challenge is at least twofold. One, I've talked already about how we essentially will have to have an extra day of Passover in terms of our homes being rid of chametz and eating Passover food a day early, because one is traditionally not allowed to burn chametz on Shabbat, do any cleaning on Shabbat or anything like that. So therefore, even though technically Passover begins on Saturday night, and Saturday would be the day to rid our homes of chametz, we can't do that on Shabbat. So you have to do that the day before. So I've talked about challah versus eating egg matzah for Shabbos dinner and Shabbos lunch. So I'm not going to repeat that. The only thing I want to add is that the Passover seder is traditionally supposed to start at nightfall. The seder is supposed to start at nightfall. So with the earlier onset now of daylight savings time, that adds a challenge to traditional Jews for the start of the seder, right? Because Shabbat was over officially this past Saturday night, a little bit after 8 o'clock. So that means, so this coming Saturday night, it'll be around 8:10 or around 8:10. And the Saturday night after that, which is Passover, is about 8:15. And that's in this area. Where Sylvia and Marv Levy live down in Florida, it's even later than that, maybe a half hour or so after that. So to start your Seder at 8:15 in the DC suburbs, 8:45, 9 o'clock in Florida, is a challenge for families, especially for young children, because young children, at least in my own young children when they were young, were in bed by 9 o'clock already. So what many families would do is start the Seder early. So if it were a weekday, there's still a challenge to doing that, and I'll get into that in a moment. But that challenge traditionally cannot be overcome when Shabbat is the day that leads into the Seder. Because one can, I don't want to say cannot. The tradition is that one should not do anything on Shabbat for something that happens after Shabbat, right? So let's say you're planning to go out with friends. This is pre-COVID. Let's say you're planning to go out with friends on a Saturday night after Shabbat's over. Traditionally, one should not start getting ready for going out on Shabbat. One is supposed to wait until Shabbat is over until getting dressed appropriately for however you're dressing to go out, and do all those preparations. So that, and then if there's a holiday starting on, this is why, for example, Yom Kippur can never be on a Friday or a Sunday. Because Yom Kippur starts at sunset. Well, sunset on a Saturday is still Shabbat, because Shabbat's not over until nightfall. So you can't start a holiday before when Shabbat leads into it while it's still Shabbat. Okay, so in other words, if Passover were on a Wednesday night, you would light the candles for Passover at sunset, at candle lighting time. but you can't light the Passover candles this year at sunset on Saturday because it's still Shabbat. So you have to wait until Shabbat is over to light the Passover candles. So some, if Passover was starting during the week, some might compromise and start the seder at candle lighting time instead of at nightfall. So you could make the argument that you could start the seder at that time. So that would mean candle lighting time this past Friday night was a little bit after 7. So 7:15 on Saturday night, March 27th, might be an easier time to start, but that's not when Passover starts this year. Passover starts at 8:15 at nightfall. Okay, so that's the challenge for how to do Passover earlier if you have little kids. It's a challenge if one is observing Passover in the traditional way. All right, so my parents, thank God, are vaccinated. They're going to be coming down to us for Passover this year, which is wonderful. So they haven't heard our plan yet. We don't have little kids anymore around the table, so that we don't have to worry about, kids getting hungry or kids getting tired, needing to go to bed. So we are going to do this in the traditional way. So that will mean, who wants to eat dinner? And we do a pretty traditional seder as well. Who wants to eat dinner around 9:30 or 10 o'clock? Nobody wants to do that. So on what we're going to do is, and I'll get to that when we get to the karpas section, we always do full-blown appetizers for karpas. So that happens near the beginning of the seder. And then the meal itself for Shulchan Aruch will be just some more appetizers. It's not going to be a full meal, so that we don't have to worry about getting sick for eating so late at night. And of course, we have Shabbos lunch earlier in the day. So you don't want to take away from Shabbat, disrespect Shabbat by not having a nice lunch on Shabbat in order to save up your appetite for Passover dinner, right? Why give Shabbat short shrift? That's not fair to Shabbat. So if you're going to have a nice Shabbos lunch, then you have to save, so then you're not really hungry by the time the Seder begins. So these are challenges for those of us planning the Seder meal. What's the menu going to be? How are we going to manage with the start of Shabbat, with the end of Shabbat and the start of the Seder and all of that? So what I'm providing for you is the traditional elements here that it is hard to compromise if you wanted to start the Seder early. If you want to start the Seder early, though, despite all of this, one could do some of the things out of order, right? I guess let me tackle this one. And then we'll get to the order of the Seder and everything will go in order. How to start the Seder early and still do everything in the Seder. So this Haggadah suggests the custom of karpas, the dipping the vegetable in the salt water, that part of the Seder. So, whether it's dipping parsley leaves or celery or a potato or a hard-boiled egg, depending on your custom and where you are from the Jewish world. The hard-boiled egg I had never seen until my wife's grandmother did that at our Seder. So there is this tradition somehow for some Polish Jews. She's from Warsaw. So there is this Ashkenazi tradition. Now, I'm Ashkenazi. I had never heard of that tradition before until I saw her grandmother, they had, as my mother-in-law and my wife were arranging the Seder table, my mother-in-law said, well, we have to have a hard-boiled egg for your grandmother. for this. And what? I never heard of that. So apparently the same tradition for why there's an egg on your seder plate is the same tradition for having a hard-boiled egg and dipping that in salt water. So the egg on the plate reminds us of the holiday sacrifice. Whether it's Passover, Sukkot, or Shavuot, there's a sacrifice meant just for the holiday itself called the Chagiga sacrifice. So the roasted egg on a Seder plate reminds us of that. The shank bone reminds us of the special Passover sacrifice, the Passover lamb sacrificed in Egypt 3,000 years ago and subsequently every other year while the temple was standing. The shank bone reminds us of the Paschal lamb sacrifice. The roasted egg reminds us of the Chagiga sacrifice. But there's this other idea that there are different traditions about how you're supposed to eat the Passover sacrifice itself. Is it only roasted, or is it boiled, or is it cooked in some other way? So the different traditions about the boiled meat get incorporated into the egg itself, and therefore boiled eggs at the Seder, at the Karpas section, is the reason why some in the Jewish community, depending where you're from, will have a hard-boiled egg at that moment, at the Karpas section. So the Haggadah, again, suggests that you can have any other food that you would dip at that point in the Seder. So that Karpas then, instead of just dipping celery or parsley leaves into salt water, which only would take a minute to eat, and then you go on, well, if you do dipping foods at that point too, in other words, appetizers for your meal, that could take a lot longer. You could, depending on how many people are around the table and how long you kind of schmooze while you're eating, that could take an hour, let's say. And so we serve gefilte fish at this point in the Seder. We serve crackers with chopped liver or baba ganoush or some other dips like that. And that's what we do for the Karpas section. So that if you were to want to go out of order, which again, this year, because of Shabbat and the tradition of not starting Passover while it's still Shabbat, one traditionally should not do this. But if one were to do this, you could start the Seder with Karpas and do the dipping foods, and that would take a while to do. And then maybe by then it would be nightfall when you can do the blessing over that when you can light candles and then do Kiddush, because Kadesh is the first section in the Seder. Right. Okay. So Mindy was just sharing her hard-boiled egg experience too. So yes. So part of my family is from Poland, Russia, the border area. The name was Grenitz, which apparently means border. So that part of the family from the German-Polish border, and I have part Romanian and part Ukrainian in my family as well. So we just didn't do the hard-boiled eggs at our Seder. So it's fun to see the variety of customs that people have, and this Haggadah also points out the different customs as well. So now let's go to the Seder table and then to the Seder itself. So we know that on the Seder table, we have the Seder plate, which is the main centerpiece, which is also used during the Seder itself. Many Haggadot have a picture of the Seder plate in the Haggadah, but of course, this Haggadah does not have a picture of the Seder plate in it. I'm picturing what I used in day school and what most conservative Hebrew schools used to. It's that yellow Haggadah that has the red border to it, published by Katav Publishing House. and that has a picture of the Seder plate on it. The one I used growing up is by Silverman, the same rabbi who edited the Black Prayer Book that was in all conservative synagogues for Shabbat and holidays. The Silverman Haggadah has a picture of the Seder plate on it, but this one does not. So there are the items on the Seder plate, of course, are, and this depends. Some of them have lettuce, chazeret, some don't. But there is maror, the bitter herbs. There's charoset. And I talk about recipes and the variety of customs of how to make charoset. It depends where you're from in the world, if you're from Turkey, from Greece, from Morocco, from Iraq, from Iran, from Poland, a whole variety of recipes of what you insist needs to be in the charoset. Do you have apples in your charoset? Of course. If you're Ashkenazi, how can you not have apples in your charoset recipe? But if you're from, if you're from Suriname, like Lenore's grandfather was, Dutch Guyana in South America, you're not going to have apples in your charoset. You'd have bananas or dates or something like that in your charoset. So it all depends where you're from in the world and what is available to make a sweet concoction. So that's charoset. And look online for, experiment. Even if you're Ashkenazi, why not try a Sephardi recipe for charoset? And we actually have done that. We've had, my mother has brought down charoset, the traditional apple walnut recipe, and we've had other charoset to supplement that too, so people can taste different kinds of charoset at the Seder. So that's a fun project to do as well. So you have lettuce, you have maror, you have charoset, you have the shank bone, you have the roasted egg, and you have there's something else that goes on the Seder plate.
Karpas.
Yes, karpas. Thank you, Margie. It was a test. I was actually asking, what is that last item? Karpas, right. So karpas goes there. And that, again, any green vegetable. So we use parsley, but it could be celery, whatever other green veg, something that when you eat it, you say the blessing, Borei Pri Ha'adamah. That's what you can use for karpas. Okay, so those are all the items on the Seder plate. Plus, on the Seder table, you need salt water in a bowl in order to dip the karpas in. And you need a stack of 3 matzot, right? Because you're going to break the middle matzah and save 1/2 of it for the afikomen for later. So you need 3 matzot, usually in its own special kind of bag with 3 sections to it, but whatever you have, it doesn't really matter. And you need a cup of wine to set aside for Elijah. So some people will have a cup of water to make the table and the symbolism more egalitarian. Why just focus on Elijah? Why not focus on a woman to think about for the Seder? So there has been a tradition of late to have a cup of water on the table, plain water, not salt water, plain water, to remind us of the well that, according to the Midrash, according to the rabbis, the people of Israel were blessed by Miriam, who is called a prophet in her own right, Moses' sister. She sang, she led the women in song and dance after the Israelites crossed the sea. And for her, the people of Israel were blessed by a miracle of a well that followed them through the 40 years of wandering in the desert. And the tradition is when the Torah in the book of Numbers describes her death, right after that description, immediately after, it says that the people of Israel complained of thirst. So because of that, why would they complain of thirst? What complaining of thirst have to do with Miriam dying, so that the tradition arose for the rabbis to say, well, Miriam must have, her death must have caused the well to dry up. And so that's the idea. And so we have a cup of water. In fact, our oldest, Elisheva, as somebody gave her as a bat mitzvah gift, a Miriam's cup. So we use that on our table as well. And to carry forward the egalitarian theme, there has been this tradition of having an orange on the Seder plate. We don't do this in our home, but some people put an orange on the Seder plate because Jewish feminists said back then, in response to, I forget the whole story, but probably an Orthodox rabbi was asked, what about egalitarianism in Judaism? Well, Judaism will be egalitarian when there'll be an orange on the Seder plate. That was the Orthodox rabbi's response to that idea of feminism and egalitarianism in Judaism. And so the Jewish feminists said, okay, we'll show him, we're going to put an orange on the Seder plate. So that's the apocryphal story behind putting an orange on the Seder plate. So the other idea is you can, if you're vegetarian, and we saw this for the first time, Lenore and I did when we were in Israel for my year in rabbinical school. Rabbi David Galinkin, who's now the past president of the Schechter Institute in Jerusalem, but at the time was a Talmud and Halacha professor at the Schechter Institute, where all the rabbinical students would study for the year. So we were invited. Lenore was asked to babysit his kids the day of the Seder, and to thank us for babysitting the kids, we were invited to their home for the Seder. And they're vegetarian, so they had a roasted beet on the Seder plate instead of a shank bone. And so a roasted beet, anybody who has roasted beets know that beets stain pretty easily. You just touch it and your fingers turn purple from that. So because the purplish color is reminding of the blood, and the shank bone is supposed to remind us of the Passover sacrifice itself, there's the idea of using a roasted beet if you're vegetarian instead of using a shank bone. It's all symbolic anyway, so why not, if you're vegetarian, why force yourself to have a shank bone and have meat on the table if you don't need to? So you can have a roasted beet there. So that's the symbolism on the table. And you need enough wine or grape juice, of course, for 4 cups of wine. So now the Seder itself. And so the Seder, of course, begins traditionally with going through the order of the Seder itself. Actually, it begins by lighting candles first. You light the Passover holiday candles first, Lahadlik Ner Shel Yom Tov, and then Shehechiyanu. This is both for the first 2 nights of Passover, first 2 nights of any holiday. You would add the Shehechiyanu to that. And again, this year the traditional time for candle lighting is nightfall, not sunset. It's nightfall. And that's how it is done when Shabbat leads into Passover. So that's how the Seder would begin, by lighting those. So here's another traditional element with lighting the candles too. Lighting candles, traditionally one is not supposed to light a fire, either on Shabbat or holidays. Now you're allowed to use fire on the holidays. You're not allowed to use fire on Shabbat for cooking, for example. You light the candles. So when you light the candles, you do this with your hands. It's supposed to be because you're not supposed to have done any work on Shabbat. So you don't see the light of the fire, and you're saying a prayer over the fire, Lahadlik Ner Shel Shabbat, and then voila, you move your hands away and there's the fire. Okay, that's the tradition behind doing that. Okay, and then the light of the candle you can use for whatever purpose you need light for. But you can't cook traditionally. I shouldn't say can't. The tradition is that one does not cook on Shabbat. It's one of the categories of work. One is allowed to cook on Yontif, on the festival day. And you're allowed to transfer a flame on the holiday or adjust the flame on a holiday. So the tradition is, let's say you have a gas flame on your stovetop or a gas flame in your oven. You could adjust the flame. You can make it higher when you put the food in and make it lower when you take the food out, either from the stovetop or from the oven itself. On a holiday, you're not supposed to adjust the flame on Shabbat. So you can transfer a flame on the holiday. So in our home, we don't turn on this. We don't light a fire on Shabbat or the holiday. So on Friday, right before candle lighting time, we'll turn on our oven and our stovetop, however many of the burners we think we're going to need to use for Shabbat and a holiday, and keep it at the lowest that it is, and keep it on Friday through Sunday night. The holiday is the first part of the holiday. Yontif is over Sunday night. And what we will do is to light the candles Saturday night and Sunday night for the holiday. I will take one of the candles and put it up to the flame and light one candle that way, and then carefully walk into the dining room where we have the other candles and light all the other candles from that one candle. So that's how we, in our home, fulfill the idea of not lighting a fire on Shabbat, but transferring the flame on the holiday. So that's how we do it, and you can that when we light the candles for the holiday, like the seder, the Haggadah has candle lighting as the first thing to do. Then it's this Haggadah has blessing the children, and then it has the signs, the parts of the seder that you traditionally sing. There are two melodies that I know for this, and we sing both melodies for this, and then you begin Kiddush. Now, Kiddush on Saturday night includes Havdalah in it. So the tradition is you don't have to light a separate Havdalah candle. You use the light of the holiday candles for the blessing on fire that's incorporated into the Kiddush. That is just a question in the chat. Yes, Elizabeth, what you're saying about that is extra homiletical interpretations of the hands to the face for lighting candles. The non-homiletic, the non-fun meaning behind it is what I said about not supposed to light a fire on Shabbat. So Shabbat begins when Shabbat begins. And so when you're lighting a fire, you want to be sure that you're not lighting a fire on Shabbat. So you cover your eyes immediately after lighting the fire, and then say the blessing on fire, lahadlik ner, candle, to light a fire, to light a candle on Shabbat, and then move your hands away, and then you see the fire there. So that's not so fun. It's not a deeply spiritual kind of explanation. There are lots of spiritual explanations, and Elizabeth, you're provided one of them for us. So Kadesh, if you have a Haggadah in front of you, you can see that the Kiddush itself has words in parentheses in case it's Shabbat, which we don't do this year, but it has an extra paragraph for Havdalah, which we would do this year just for Saturday night. And so after you don't drink the wine, so Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh Yisrael v'hazmanim. Right, so you don't drink the wine then. You would usually just add she'achiyanu to it, You don't do Shehecheyanu yet. Before Shehecheyanu, you add the extra paragraph for Havdalah. So there's a prayer for creating the light of the fire, which you would use the light of the Passover candles for the flame for the for this prayer. And then the Havdalah prayer itself, marking distinction between Shabbat and other days of the week. Distinction between Shabbat and a holiday, because a holiday is one notch lower than Shabbat is. And then Hamavdil, it ends Hamavdil, not Hamavdil ben Kodesh L'chol, like the Havdalah prayer usually ends, for the one who distinguishes between holy and non-holy, but rather between Ben Kodesh LaKodesh, between holy and holy, the holiness of Shabbat versus the holiness of the holiday. And then it's Shehecheyanu. So this is just some of the logistics that Passover will add to us this year because it's starting on a Saturday night, and how we incorporate the traditional observances and daylight savings time into the start of our seder. So again, Kiddush shouldn't be done if you are planning on doing your seder in a different order, and you wanted to do it, and if you're planning to do it earlier, you shouldn't do Kiddush until 8:15 in suburban DC time, when it's nightfall on Saturday night, the March 27th. Okay. Then the next part of the Seder is washing the hands, and there's lots of debate and discussion as to why we wash hands without a blessing at this point. Like, what's the purpose of that? So there's certainly one of the underlying principles of the Haggadah itself is that we're supposed to arouse questions from children at the Seder. So because the word Haggadah, which means telling, is from the verse in Exodus and a couple of other places in the Torah where it says, V'higadata levincha, you shall tell your son or tell your child about what happened in Egypt. So the telling of your child is understood by the rabbis as a more Socratic method. All right, so there is a lot of Greek and Roman influence in the Haggadah itself and in the customs, the main one being reclining when we drink the wine. Every cup of wine, usually whatever edition of Haggadah that you use, if it has directions, will tell you, lean to the left and take a sip of wine. And I might say that with eating the matzah too, when you get there, lean to the left and take a bite of matzah. So what's the leaning have to do? The idea is that when the rabbis created the Seder as we know it, or at least the outline of the Seder as we know it 1,800 years ago, they were basing it on a model that they saw from Greek and Roman culture, and that is a symposium. You see this clearly if you've ever visited the archaeological site in northern Israel called Tzipori. So Tzipori is this beautiful town that was an interfaith town. That is, Romans and Jews lived peacefully together in that town. The lots and lots of buildings have been uncovered by archaeologists, and the floors of those buildings with mosaic tiles are absolutely stunning. So there's the Cardo, the main street of the town of Tzipori. By the way, the rabbis of the Mishnah lived in the town of Tzipori. So they're off the main street, there's the shopping area that has a huge mosaic tile floor on it with a whole variety of symbolism on it that you really need a tour guide to explain to you. One of the fancy villas that was uncovered in the town showed what it was the dining room that actually has markings on the floor for where the table is supposed to go, and the lounge chairs, kind of a chaise lounge that we just know from documents from around that time that described how the Roman elite and wealthy would have a meal. Their meal would involve philosophical discussions about a whole variety of topics. And they would be eating lying down or reclining. And so so the markings on the floor showed where the chairs or the tables were supposed to go for that. So the reclining, the rabbi said, "Oh, what are free, wealthy people supposed to do?" Well, those are the Romans. We are kind of at the beck and call of the Romans. We're oppressed, but if we were going to be free, we'd be acting like a Roman. And if we're acting like a Roman, that means we would be reclining while we are eating. Okay, so the reclining reminds us of the influence of Greek and Roman culture into the Haggadah itself. The washing of hands at this point, and also the other influence is the whole section of the Haggadah known as Magid, another variant in the word Haggadah. The telling section is like what a symposium would do. You raise a topic and you exchange ideas back and forth. So this idea that the Haggadah has how we tell our children the story, if we did it in a Socratic method and asking questions, or presenting some things on a table that would arouse questions from the children, then that's exactly what we're supposed to do. So if a child sees the leader of the seder washing their hands, but not saying the blessing, then a child who is growing up in a traditional home and sees the grown-ups washing hands before saying hamotzi and saying a blessing for washing the hands before saying hamotzi, but here washing the hands before eating a vegetable, hey, what's that all about? And that's exactly why we wash the hands without saying a blessing. That's the one answer that seems that most agree as to why we wash hands here. The Haggadah also points out that at the time when the temple was standing, ritual purity was much more complex and much more nuanced, and so many logistics involved in that for whatever we were eat. So that, in other words, we have to be in a state of ritual purity in order to eat. The food that we eat has to be ritually pure. And so there are complex laws involved in ritual purity that we have essentially one element left in Jewish tradition today, married women going to the mikveh once a month. But there are many, many other elements. And there's one symbolic thing we do if we go to a cemetery, leaving the cemetery, we're supposed to wash our hands. So those two things are the only two things that we do symbolically for washing, for that reflect the intricate and lengthy laws of purity. So perhaps the washing the hands before the vegetable could remind us of that time 2,000 years ago when the temple was still standing, that people would wash hands for no matter what they ate, not just if it was a full meal and saying hamotzi. So here, karpas, as I said, there's lots of traditions about what you can dip and how you can make this seder that much more user-friendly for people who are around the table, so that they're not asking, when are we eating dinner? How much longer is it going to take? So if you have an extensive appetizers served here, you kind of help with abating some of those feelings. Yachatz, the breaking of the middle matzah, is of course related to the afikomen later in the seder. So you break the middle matzah, put half of it away. So what I usually do, based on however many children there are around the table, I will break that part that is the afikomen into several pieces to however many children there are around the table and put each little piece in its own afikomen kind of bag. And then the idea is to hide that later. I don't do such a really an extensive job of hiding it, but the idea that the seder is ransomed by the or held up by the children who find the afikomen and say, I can't give it back until you give me something for it, because you can't complete the seder until eating the afikomen. So that whole tradition is from the Middle Ages. It doesn't go back all the way to the rabbis. It goes back just to the Middle Ages. The Magid section, I must tell you that this is the one section of the Seder that either makes the Seder longer or shorter, depending on how much you do of the Magid section. There is the 4 questions here and the 4 sons. Most everybody does that, and most people have the youngest one around the table sing the 4 questions, and talking about the 4 sons, the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who doesn't know how to ask. So you have that, and then the telling of the story. The rabbis don't tell us how we're supposed to tell the story. The rabbis just say that you begin with the bad and lead up to the good. So you begin with the bad part of Jewish history, how we came to be slaves in Egypt, what slavery was like, and then to the good, God took us out of Egypt to the promised land, and on the way got the Torah at Mount Sinai. So as long as it follows that trajectory from bad to good, the way I just did it could suffice in telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. The Haggadah presents midrash on this that is many, many pages long. There is a new Haggadah published by the Reform movement based on their new series of prayer books known as Mishkan Tfilah is the Reform movement's new prayer book that most Reform synagogues in our area, and I think most Reform synagogues in America, have adopted, just like our synagogue and all conservative synagogues adopted Lev Shalem. Mishkan Tfilah is the new Sidur of the Reform movement. So they have something similar called Mishkan HaSeder. And their Magid section is totally different from the traditional Magid section. So as is the custom of the Reform movement, which is not bound by Jewish law and tradition, but rather to more progressive ideas and how to respond in a modern way to traditional Jewish ideas, have different verses than what is suggested in the traditional Haggadah for the Magid section. So it isn't that long, and it is, I'm just turning to it now. So they have a couple of the things that our traditional Haggadah has, but it has different verses that it's using, like the death of Joseph, which isn't in our Haggadah, and just the story of the time in Egypt itself, as opposed to the chapter of the paragraph that's in the Magid section, which is actually from verses from the book of Deuteronomy. So instead of using that, they are using different verses. So if you're looking for a semi-traditional Haggadah, so it's deceptive. It looks like a traditional Haggadah because there's lots of Hebrew in this Reform Haggadah. So it looks like a regular Haggadah in that way, which is incredible for the Reform movement and the evolution of the Reform movement. You look at a prayer book now for the Reform movement versus one from 50 years ago, it's night and day. From 50 years ago, it'd be mostly English with a few Hebrew words. Now it's a lot of Hebrew. It almost looks like a conservative prayer book with how a Reform prayer book looks now, and the Haggadah the same way. But there are lots of modern Israeli and American poetry in this Haggadah, a lot of other readings, traditional commentary too, and it has all the parts of the Seder in it as well. It's really an interesting Haggadah if you're looking for something else for your Seder this year. So that's the Magid section and what to do with that. The 10 plagues, because we're running out of time. Let me just say this about the 10 plagues. Obviously, the tradition is to take a drop of wine as we recite the 10 plagues. And there's many of the Seder supplements and these so-called different Haggadot that are out there for different social justice issues will have their own 10 plagues. That will be like a key feature of a modern social justice kind of Haggadah, talking about the 10 plagues related to that particular social justice issue. So I would highly recommend coming up with an 11th plague and taking an extra drop of wine for COVID, or doing something along that line that we can, if we are having family with us this year, that because we couldn't have it last year, that could be something to spend some time focusing on at that point in the Seder. And that we're still taking a drop of wine out because we're still affected by COVID this year. So it's just one of many kinds of creative things we can do with the Seder this year, reflecting the pandemic. After the whole Magid section, there is the eating of the washing the hands. There is motzi. There is maror, eating the vegetable, the bitter herb, and then eating the hillel sandwich, which is the bitter herb with charoset between two pieces of matzah, reminding us. So let me end with this. We have 2 minutes left. So let me end with this. The Haggadah, as we know it today, is really a response to two things. How Passover was observed in the time of the temple, mainly bringing the Passover lamb, bringing either a lamb or a goat, a 1-year-old lamb or 1-year-old goat, to be sacrificed at the temple in Jerusalem. So the Haggadah is a response to that element of it, and also to the very first Passover as described in Egypt in chapter 12 of the book of Exodus. So the combination of what the Torah describes and what the rabbis described happened at the temple when people brought their Passover sacrifice merged together to become the Haggadah as we know it, and the symbols on the table and everything else we do in the Haggadah. So that when we recite the Haggadah, we are bringing history to life. We are imagining that we are sitting down with our families in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. We're also imagining that we are leaving Egypt as our ancestors did 3,000 years ago. And for me, the key line in all of the Haggadah is B'chol dor vador chayav adam lirot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In every generation, a person has to see him or herself as if they left Egypt. And that not only is understood as putting ourselves in our ancestors' shoes, but also putting ourselves, what does it mean to be free or looking for freedom? To be an advocate for freedom, to be an advocate for justice, especially racial justice, as is being restricted today. So the Israelites themselves had God on their side and Moses as their leader to take them out of Egypt. And as a result, 36 times throughout the Torah, we're told to love the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt. And in every generation, we have to see ourselves as if we left Egypt, For me, that is about what it means to be a stranger, what it means to be an advocate for the other in our community, so that all of us together are can be treated with respect and sanctity, because we're all created in the image of God. So I want to wish everybody a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a happy and kosher, sweet Passover. If we say it in Yiddish, a Zisen Pesach, a sweet Passover holiday. May it be safe and healthy. And if you're celebrating with family around your table, say a Shehecheyanu for that as well, and enjoy that opportunity to celebrate Passover with them this year. So Chag Sameach, everybody.
Chag Sameach, Rabbi.
Thank you, Jonah.
You.